And welcome back to the show. Hunger Free America is a not-for-profit organization that is working to enact the policies and programs needed to end domestic hunger and ensure all Americans have sufficient access to nutritious food. Now, the organization has been an effective champion in the fight for economic, racial, and food justice, working to implement innovative yet practical ways to have solutions to hunger. Now, joining us to share more is the CEO of Hunger Free America, Joel Berg. And Joel, good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me and focusing on this vital issue.
Yeah, I'm thanking you for the work that you're doing, because when we talk about hunger in America, it's obviously an issue that continues to grow and grow, even more further exacerbated since COVID-19. But from your perspective, give us where you see hunger in America right now.
Even before the pandemic, we had a national hunger crisis. In 2019, in the best economy in decades, 35 million Americans lived in homes that couldn't afford enough food. 35 million Americans. And that was when the economy was still theoretically in great shape. And it won't be a shock to your viewers that Bronx has a particularly high poverty and hunger rate, but it's important to understand this is a problem in all 50 states. This is a problem in urban, suburban, and rural communities across the United States, even leafy suburbs of New York City. Westchester, Rockland County, where I grew up, Nassau County, Bergen County, places that were perceived to be solidly middle-class places a generation ago, now have significant numbers of people who can't afford enough food because the prices are just too darn high and wages are just too low. And unfortunately, in the Bronx, even though the Bronx has made a lot of progress over the last few decades, there's still a boatload of poverty. A shocking 1 in 4 Bronx residents live in homes that can't afford enough food, according to Hunger Free America's survey. 1 in 4 Bronx residents struggle against hunger, and even worse, 1 in 3 Bronx children struggle against hunger. About 1 in 4 working people in the Bronx, that's people working hard, playing by the rules, just don't earn enough to feed their families. And about 1 in 5 seniors in the Bronx can't always afford enough food. Now, are people starving the way you might see in parts of the developing world? No, because there is a federal nutrition safety net. There are some charities that fill in the gaps, but people really are suffering mightily. They can't get all the food they need. They can't get the healthy food they need. And the greatest irony in the world is that hunger and obesity are flip sides of the same malnutrition coin. In many Bronx neighborhoods that have the highest level of poverty and hunger and food insecurity also have the highest levels of obesity, because healthier food's more expensive. It's less convenient. It's harder to find in these neighborhoods. So that was before the pandemic. Since the pandemic, people in poverty and hunger became poorer and hungrier, and people at the edge of poverty became poor and hungry. Sometimes people give the impression, well, lots of rich people suffered. Not true. They had assets to fall back on. The people who suffered were either already suffering or at the edge of suffering, but it did get much, much worse.
Yeah. And so when we talk about here in the borough of the Bronx, obviously, we know a lot of people are really struggling. We know with COVID, we saw increased numbers. And as I think you mentioned it, you definitely did mention it, where there is poverty, there is going to be higher food insecurity. What can you give us about where we are as far as improving? Are we getting better or worse when it comes to food insecurity in the Bronx?
Well, we were making some progress over the previous 5 or 6 years because the minimum wage went up, there was economic growth, and an increase in the safety net. And then the bottom dropped out of everything with the pandemic, and there was a huge spike in hunger. New York City may have had up to 2 million people, food insecure, unable to afford enough food in the pandemic. But the real hero of this story is the federal government. I know it's not popular to say that the federal government can help with problems, but it's also true. Food banks and soup kitchens and food pantries and mutual aid societies and neighborhood fridges all do great work, but they are very, very, very small, and even in their collective impact. The federal safety net programs like SNAP, that used to be called food stamps, WIC for pregnant women and children under 5, the pandemic EBT program for parents for parents of kids when schools are closed. those are at least 20 times, 20 times the dollar amount of food distributed by every charity in America. And the dollar amount of those benefits skyrocketed in the pandemic because of President Biden, because of Senator Schumer, because of Senator Gillibrand, because of Congressman Torres and Espaillat. And I'm not being partisan. The fact of the matter is the Democrats got this done when the Republicans opposed it. That's just a factual statement. And things are still mighty tough. And people are really suffering on a massive level, but they're not starving to death because our very, very, very rich uncle named Sam did step up to the plate.
Yeah. So there was a recent report on hunger, and there were some very interesting findings. Give us a little bit of an update as to what the report uncovered.
We uncovered, as I said, that 1 in 4 people in the Bronx can't afford enough food. And, for those long-term Bronx residents, you remember huge swaths of the Bronx that were just burnt out and were nothing but really empty lots and old bricks and empty lots. And you say, okay, you look at that and say, well, that's poverty, that's destitution. And the fact that the housing stock at least looks a little better on the outside, that there's been such a growth in the population, including such a great increase in immigrants coming into the Bronx, really hides the reality that there still really is mass suffering and mass deprivation. And today, a little different than a few decades ago, because very few people do get cash welfare anymore. Today, the vast majority of people in the Bronx and citywide in New York and anywhere in the nation who are hungry are working. And it's not lazy bums who don't want to work. If that was ever true, that's certainly not true today. It's working parents. The minimum wage is only $15 an hour. And many people in the Bronx are excluded from that. They're undocumented immigrants who are paid under the table for less. They're tipped workers who have to rely on tips. But even if you're getting $15 an hour, that's about $25,000 a year for full-time work. And as you know, you'd be lucky in the Bronx to get a 1-bedroom apartment for, let's say, $1,500 a month. And so that's $18,000 a year. And so if you're getting paid $25,000 a year for wages and paying $18,000 a year just for rent, no shock that you don't have a lot of money left over for food. So our survey at Hunger Free America found the largest number of people who are hungry are working people, but also very significant numbers of children, senior citizens, people with disabilities, and veterans. And so it's people who've given their all to this society, and the least we can do is make sure they have enough to eat. Yeah. I also say one thing we found is there's a huge correlation between the pandemic and hunger. And so there's been a fair amount of reporting on the stark reality that the number of people who died from COVID was greater in low-income communities and communities of color, and greater per capita, in the Bronx. And the number of people who got sick from COVID was greater in the Bronx, was greater in communities of color and low-income communities. And people say, why is that? And some people say, well, low-income people were more likely to be forced to work outside, work in a supermarket, work someplace they had to commute to. They didn't have the luxury that white-collar workers such as myself have of mostly working from home, although I'm in my office today, I mostly work from home. And so we know low-income New Yorkers were forced to go out there and be exposed to other people. They were considered essential workers, even though they weren't paid as essential workers. So we know that's a problem. Number two, we know that healthcare is less available for low-income people, and sometimes the quality of healthcare is less good in low-income neighborhoods. But three, food is a huge contributor to this. We know that people who are malnourished have compromised immune systems, so they're more likely to catch COVID-19 to begin with, and more likely to pass it on. And then we also know, it's a wonkish term, comorbidities, if I can even say it, but it means things that might make you more likely to die from something. So comorbidities for COVID happen to be obesity, hypertension, heart disease, and diabetes. And so we know those things are more likely to happen to low-income people who don't have access to healthier food. And so there's no question, as our studies show, that the hunger and food insecurity in New York fueled and continues to fuel the pandemic. Now, we at Hunger Free America, we're doing outreach not only on food out of our Bronx office, but also helping people understand how they can get vaccines and how they can get boosters. And we're dispelling the myths about how these vaccines are supposedly dangerous. Vaccines have been around for a few hundred years. George Washington mandated that his troops get smallpox vaccines. The idea that this is a brand new technology that's dangerous is just as that idea is dangerous. The vaccines aren't dangerous, and we're particularly concerned that African Americans and Latinx people have lower vaccination rates than white Americans and white Bronx residents. So we really want to get the word out. And I just throw in that we under the pandemic we did open a brand new office on Sheridan Avenue in the Bronx. And we got some money from the city to do that. That money was not continued, basically because of bureaucratic infighting between the mayor and the council. So we really hope our old ally, Vanessa Gibson, the incoming borough president of the Bronx, and the council and the incoming mayor can fix this, because if not, we're going to have to close down our office in the Bronx that just has helped countless New Yorkers not only access food, but access vaccine information.
What have you heard from the elected officials, given the fact that you are on the verge of really shutting down? Have you got any intel on that?
Yeah, without getting too deep in the weeds, basically the council is blaming the mayoral administration. The mayoral administration is blaming the council, and outgoing council members are saying, well, take it up with the new council in January. And my response was, you're still on our payroll, the public payroll, till December 31st. You really need to fix this, pronto. I know Comptroller elect Lander and Mayor-elect Adams have started a task force on better payments for nonprofit groups. So we've had a lot of conversations, but no firm commitments. So if any of your viewers happen to run into any of their elected officials, I hope they'd really press this. We know that food distribution can fill in the gaps, but helping people get government benefits, which they can use at supermarkets, bodegas, farmers markets, is actually a far more impactful strategy to fight hunger. Every dollar we spend on access to these benefits generates $60 of federal benefits. But the fact of the matter is that helping people get benefits doesn't generate the warm and fuzzies feeling that giving out turkeys on Thanksgiving does. So we need people not only to act with their hearts, but also with their heads and fund the things that really are the most effective and most impactful.
You mentioned government. I want to continue to stay along that line, and give me your thoughts on the Build Back Better bill, and what would you like to see happen?
Well, first of all, the Build Back Better bill is really an expansion of what the Congress and the Biden administration passed in the American Rescue Plan. And as I said, the extra funding for that for low-income people, including cash through the family tax credit, dramatically reduced child poverty in the Bronx and reduced hunger. So we need the Build Back Better bill to build on that, to make it easier for kids to get school meals for free. The Build Back Better bill also would extend this program called Pandemic EBT to give parents money when their kids' schools are closed. Very, very critical to help families access food over the summer when schools are closed. And that provisions do apply to undocumented immigrants. And there are a lot of undocumented immigrants in the Bronx who I believe we should warmly welcome to this country, as this country welcomed in my immigrant forebears. And they're working hard, and they're doing very dangerous underpaid jobs. So getting them food is pretty critical in the Build Back Better plan, as well as working parents. And the bill would make childcare more affordable, healthcare more affordable, housing more affordable, prescription drugs more affordable, and put more cash directly into the pockets of low-income people. So taken as a whole, the Build Back Better bill, if passed, would dramatically reduce hunger and poverty in the Bronx and nationwide. Sometimes people think hunger is a food distribution issue. It really isn't. Hunger in America is an affordability issue. We have plenty of food. We're the most agriculturally abundant nation in the history of the world. The problem isn't having food. The problem is people don't have enough money to afford food.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? I mean, obviously the advocacy continues, really shedding the light on this topic. What do you got coming around the corner in terms of advocacy and policy initiatives that you're trying to help, that you're trying to get the public aware of and trying to get the public support with?
First of all, I'd say if anyone listening needs food, you can call 1-866-3-HUNGRY, 1-866-3-HUNGRY during any workday. And we run the National Hunger Hotline on behalf of USDA, and we can get you food help. If you have the ability to donate or you have the ability to volunteer, you can go to our website at www.hungerfreeamerica.org. One thing we're excited about at the city level is Mayor-elect Adams has pledged to create what he called a My City portal to make it easier for people to apply online for a wide variety of benefits. It's sort of crazy that you have a different application system in New York to get SNAP benefits for your family, nutrition benefits, than WIC benefits for your family, also a nutrition program. And so we're really hoping the Adams administration works with us to administer that. I'm very honored that myself and Emilio Tavares, who is our director of advocacy and a Bronx resident, have been named as advisors to the Adams transition team. And so we are very hopeful we can work with them to make this major public policy improvement. You shouldn't have to go to 8 different offices to get 6 different benefits.
Yeah. And that's it, the streamlining of event. I think so many times when we talk about food insecurity and hunger, prior to the pandemic, there was this access to resources on the part of the public having a hard time really accessing resources. Are you finding now with the pandemic that and this food insecurity surge that now more and more people are finding more access to these resources?
Some, but there's still not a lot of knowledge, particularly people who are newly eligible do not know what they're eligible for. The pandemic EBT program is still relatively new, and that's why the work of Hunger Free America and others is so critical in continuing to get the word out.
Yeah. And so for people who want to support the work of Hunger Free America, how do they go about doing that?
Go to hungerfreeamerica.org. That's hungerfreeamerica.org. Now, I'm assuming if you can watch BronxNet on cable, you probably have internet access. But if not, you're still old school and want to call, you can call us at 212-825-0028.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I want to get a chance to talk a little bit about the closing the meal gap. And that's an important thing in 2021. So that act. So talk to us about that.
Well, Senator Gillibrand has proposed a number of bills. One, like closing the meal gap, would increase the value of SNAP benefits. We just did an event with her at Hostos Community College to highlight her EATS Act, which would make it easier for college students to be able to access SNAP nutrition assistance benefits. And so there really are a wide variety of actions we need the federal government to take. The problem isn't our elected officials. The problem is the elected officials from Iowa and Utah and Arizona and West Virginia. So we really need a national movement to pressure them to do better.
Yeah. And so when we talk about the national movement, obviously we know the challenges that are felt locally. I know there's some resistance sometimes by people, and I wonder what kind of rock they're living under when they think that there's not a food insecurity issue. It's amazing to have conversations with some people who say that's really not a problem. Have you found that to be the case too?
If you could only hear that, that was a very deep sigh. Yes, I've been working on this issue more than 25 years, and I've been fighting against people who still deny this is a problem. And let me be clear, it's not accidental. There's some well-meaning people who don't understand it's a problem, but in the same way, some people are paid a lot of money to lie to us about climate change and say we don't know if it's really happening. People are paid a lot of money to lie to us about hunger. And say, oh, we don't know if it's a problem. Oh, well, there's obesity. There can't be hunger. People have smartphones now. There can't be hunger, ignoring the fact that smartphones are a key tool to keep in employment. And why would people lie about this? Because if you admit it's a problem, then you have to take steps to raise wages, increase employment, reduce the cost of housing, and make sure the wealthy pay their fair share to pay for an adequate nutrition safety net. And so it makes people feel better. Oh, this is a problem for North Korea or India or Honduras, but not a problem for, America. That's a very, very convenient but very dangerous denial. And so I patiently and not so patiently have spent the last few decades of helping try to educate people. Now, there was a great, great, great philosopher named Chico Marx from the Marx Brothers. And he once said, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And I just say that to any doubters. Go to a soup kitchen, go to a food pantry, go to a great program like POTS in the Bronx, part of the solution in the Bronx, and see people lined up in the cold to get food. If you don't believe me, because I'm an advocate and a service provider, then go to one of these agencies. POTS has a long affiliation with the Catholic Church. There are many, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, based organizations throughout New York City, the faith-based Armies of Compassion. Don't believe me? Go see people lining up for food. Go talk to low-income people. They will tell you that hunger is a very, very real problem, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away.
Joe Berg, we got to leave it there, but thank you so much for the conversation, and we'll continue to follow these initiatives as they go forward. Love to have you back in the new year so we can get an update as to how things are working out with the new mayoral administration. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.